Some men are born with a silver spoon. Life is a bed of roses for them since the first moment they took a breath in this world. They have every luxury and comfort imaginable. They've never known what hunger, thirst, or loneliness feels like. However, there are people who aren't as fortunate as those blessed souls. Their life has been pain and misery. They haven't seen happiness in their entire life, not even for a second. There are countless reasons why someone may live a miserable life. Sometimes people face hardships because of where they were born. Other times it's due to cruel circumstances of fate. Such was the case of the protagonist of our story today, whose whole life changed after committing a crime he probably didn't even commit. The United States federal government operated Alcatraz from 1934 to 1963. This island, located in the middle of San Francisco Bay, housed some of the most notorious criminals in America. Men like bank robbers, mobsters, and murderers shared the same space behind the cold iron bars, including Frank Morris, along with brothers John and Clarence Anglin. For a normal person living on the outside, these sound like very exciting professions. In reality, however, they're anything but thrilling. The men serving time at Alcatraz were considered incorrigible and extremely dangerous. The U.S. federal government believed sending them to regular prisons would endanger other inmates and staff. Therefore, it decided to build a new prison on Alcatraz Island to house these hardened criminals. Frank Morris was convicted in 1953 for his involvement in a botched bank robbery in New Mexico. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison. His accomplice in that crime, Doc Burkhart, received a much harsher sentence, 99 years. He wanted out. At the time of his arrest, Frank was carrying a gun and some ammunition, which he claimed belonged to an undercover police officer. When authorities found out about this, they charged him with trying to shoot a federal agent. Consequently, Frank received another sentence of 10 years in prison. However, given his good conduct, he was able to convince the parole board to commute his sentence to 15 years. Meanwhile, Clarence Anglin had a less conventional journey to Alcatraz. He was accused of killing a sheriff. However, the jury acquitted him. Later, however, the state charged him with manslaughter for shooting a deputy collector of internal revenue, which earned him a 20-year prison sentence. On the other hand, John Anglin wasn't a violent man, but his choices led him to Alcatraz. Once he set fire to a U.S. Army draft board in protest against the Vietnam War, and later he robbed a post office, which landed him in Alcatraz. When these three men arrived at Alcatraz, they learned the hard way that there was no chance of getting a pardon from President Eisenhower. Once inside, each of them realized they had only two options: either stay quiet and serve their sentence peacefully, or try to escape and get caught or die trying. Despite being very different from one another, the three men decided to go down the road of silence. They kept to themselves, avoiding unnecessary interactions with others, and observing everything and everyone around them. They knew that if they wanted to plot something big, they had to gather intel and wait for the right moment to strike. In addition to being a maximum security prison, Alcatraz also served as a punishment for bad behavior in other prisons. For example, George "Machine Gun" Kelly, famous for robbing banks and killing several law enforcement officers, was transferred to Alcatraz for assaulting a guard. Similarly, Alfred Packer, who cannibalized several companions after getting lost in the Colorado wilderness, also ended up in Alcatraz. Inmates like them were considered incorrigible. If you were sent to Alcatraz, you were marked for the rest of your life. Even if you behaved well in prison, you wouldn't receive a pardon. As far as President Eisenhower was concerned, once you entered Alcatraz, you weren't coming out unless you were carried out in a coffin. Among all the inmates at Alcatraz, the toughest gang was the Mafia. Members of this organization maintained a constant struggle for power, often clashing with inmates from rival gangs. Guards did little to stop the violence between inmates, allowing the Mafia to gain more control over the prison. Furthermore, The mafia demanded payment of a certain amount of money from the relatives of inmates for protection. Otherwise, they threatened to harm them. Therefore, when Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz, he needed to pay a substantial sum of money to join the mafia. In return, they promised to protect him from other gangs. However, he never intended to pay them. Instead, he devised a plan to steal the money. One day, Frank noticed that guards transported money between the prison's various departments in open mail trucks. He reported this unusual practice to the warden, highlighting the obvious security risk. Sure enough, soon after he reported the issue, the guards began transporting the money in armored vehicles. However, Frank continued to insist that such measures were insufficient and suggested transferring the money to the bank by boat. The warden agreed to his suggestion and ordered that the money be taken to the Alcatraz docks and loaded onto a boat. That night, Frank used a sharpened comb to cut through the bars of his cell window and escaped. He jumped into the water and swam to the docked boat, where he stole approximately $11,000. With this move, Frank made enemies within the prison's mafia. As a result, he was transferred to the most secure wing of the prison and was never allowed outside again. This wasn't the end of his story, however. He befriended the Anglin brothers, and they hatched a plan to escape together. The three men began meticulously drilling holes in the back of their cells using spoons and saw blades smuggled from the prison machine shop. They concealed their work behind cardboard and false walls they created. Day after day, month after month, they progressed with their plan without anyone noticing. On the night of June 11th, 1962, the three men put their plan into action. They climbed through the holes they had laboriously dug in the back of their cells. From there, they headed to a utility corridor and climbed up to the roof of the prison. This was the most dangerous part of their escape. The men had prepared life vests and a raft made of more than 50 raincoats sewn and sealed together. Then they jumped into the icy waters of San Francisco Bay. A strong current pulled them out into the dark waters. No one knows for sure if they made it out alive. But the following morning, the prison staff discovered that the men were missing. A massive search operation ensued, combing the bay for miles and patrolling the coast. Helicopters scanned the area, but no trace of the three prisoners was found. Some believe the men likely drowned in the icy waters, while others maintain they successfully reached freedom. Letters were reportedly sent to family members claiming the men were alive, but their authenticity remains uncertain. The FBI investigated the escape for years, but the mystery deepened with time. No concrete evidence emerged to support any of the theories, leaving the case unsolved. In 1979, one of the brothers' sisters told the press that she had received a phone call from Clarence, who informed her that he and his brother had managed to reach Mexico. However, further investigation failed to confirm this lead. Years passed, but the escape remained a puzzle. In 2013, a British author proposed that the trio might have survived and lived in Brazil under false identities. Adding intrigue to the tale, the FBI officially closed the case in 2016, but not before releasing a statement acknowledging the possibility that the men had escaped and were living somewhere under assumed names. In conclusion, the case of the escape from Alcatraz remains an enigma. What we do know is that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were determined individuals who refused to accept their fate. Contemplating the idea of spending the rest of their lives behind bars was unbearable for them. They decided to take matters into their own hands and attempt a daring escape. They exhibited remarkable patience, strategy, and teamwork. However, the truth of what happened to them after they disappeared into the foggy night remains a mystery yet to be solved. Perhaps their story will continue to captivate us for generations to come. And now I want to hear from you. What do you think happened to Frank, John, and Clarence? Were they able to make it to freedom, or did they meet their end in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay? Share your theories in the comments section. And before you go, Don't forget to leave a like for more captivating stories. Thanks for watching and see you next time.